In the green hills, where time seemed to slow down, he lived an old farmer named Arthur. His skin was a map of decades of sunshine and work, his thick and calloused hands, witnesses of a life dedicated to the earth he loved deeply. Arthur had no great riches, nor wanted them. His most precious treasure was not made of gold or silver, but of aged oak wood and memories that time could not erase. It was his wagon, a family inheritance that had moved from grandfather to father and finally to him. Every board and every wood came telling a silent story. This was not a simple cart to carry harvests. It was a sanctuary on wheels, a time capsule that carried the sweat of his ancestors and the echo of the laughs of his late wife, his beloved Isabel. She remembered her sitting next to her silver hair to flutter on the wind while traveling to the village market. The sound of the wheels on the dirt road, the melody of her common life. The wagon was a rustic work of art, built with a skill that has not been seen in modern days. The tall and robust wheels were carved from a single oak trunk, and the side panels displayed delicate notches, now softened by the touch of countless hands and the rain and sun caress over almost a century. For Arthur, fixing and taking care of the wagon was a sacred ritual. He knew every ranger, every peculiarity of his aged structure. It was with her that she performed her daily tasks, helping neighbors to transport hay, leading her fresh vegetables to the village square, and sometimes simply walking the rural roads at dusk, accompanied only by her faithful companion, an imposing and kind bull called Thunder. Thunder, with his dark hair and docile eyes, was more than a work animal. It was Arthur's silent confidant, the patient listener of his stories and the tireless partner in his daily work, united with him by the yoke and a bond of affection. Arthur's routine was simple and unchanging like the seasons. By breaking from dawn, it was already standing, the smell of fresh coffee to mix with the air of the morning. After a modest breakfast, he went to the stable, where Thunder greeting him with a low and affectionate mullet. Together they bound the old oak cart, and the day of work began. There was no hurry at its pace, only the constant cadence of those who understand the cycles of nature. They were a family and comforting vision for everyone in the small village of Vale Sereno. The children ran to wave when they saw them pass, and adults greeted him with respect that was reserved for the pillars of the community. Arthur's wagon was not just yours, it belonged to the landscape, the soul of that place, a symbol of perseverance, tradition, and beauty of a life lived with simplicity and honor, a living link with the past that everyone appreciated. Many times, in the late afternoon, Arthur was sitting on the back of the wagon, parked under the shadow of a great flowery IPE, and simply observed the world. Thunder was quietly beside him, the sound of his chewing a soothing murmur. It was in these moments of stillness that the memories came more strongly. He saw his father, a strong, silent man, to teach him to handle the reins, his voice a distant echo in the breeze. He saw his mother to put bread baskets, just bought in the wagon, to share with the needy. And via Isabel, always Isabel, her smile to illuminate the darkest days. The wagon was the thread that weaved all these memories in a rich and vibrant tapestry of their existence. It was more than wood and iron. It was the heart of his family, the guardian of his history, pulsing with the lives of generations they loved and worked in that same earth, under that same blue sky. The value of the wagon transcended any monetary measure. When an antique dealer in the city offered him an amount that could guarantee him a comfortable renovation, Arthur just smiled and shook his head. "There are things that money can't buy, my young man," he had said with his calm voice. "This wagon has the soul of my people. Selling would be like selling my own past, and a man without a past has no future. The dealer is gone, confused by such sentimentality, unable to understand that, for Arthur, each wooden barbst, each rusty screw had a value that exceeded any offer. It was a pact of loyalty with his ancestors and a promise to himself that he would keep the flame of tradition alive to his last breath. It was your duty, your honor, and your joy. Thunder seemed to understand the holiness of that object. The bull, despite its immense strength, was moving with surprising care when linked to the wagon. It seemed to feel the weight of the memories she carried, beyond the physical load. He was never frightened, never stuffed abruptly. There was a harmony in the way man, animal, and object moved together, a choreographed dance for years of respect and shared routine. The villagers used to comment that Thunder did not pull the wagon, he accompanied her, like a guardian to escort a queen. This deep connection between the farmer and his bull was something beautiful and rare, proof that communication does not need words. It was an understanding that came from the heart, forged in daily work and the shared silence of the open fields, a symphony without notes. The wagon was also a community symbol. In time of feast, it was decorated with flowers and colored ribbons, transporting the patron saints in the religious processions that united the village. In times of necessity, it was the first to arrive, loaded with food or materials to help a family in trouble. The story of Arthur's wagon was actually the story of Vale Sereno. She had witnessed marriages, baptisms, and funerals. It becomes generations born and leave. It was a point of reference, a constant in a rapid change world. His presence on the dusty road was a guarantee that certain things, the things that really matter, such as goodness, the help and respect for the roots, still endured, firm and unshakable as the old oak he had been done. Arthur never felt alone, even after Isabel's departure. He had the earth, he had Thunder, and had the wagon. This trio formed its universe, a complete and meaningful world. The conversations he had with his bull were monologues full of wisdom and longing, and he believed that the animal understood every word. The wagon, in turn, responded with his family rangits, every sound a word of comfort, a memory that he was not abandoned. It was an ecosystem of love and loyalty, self-sufficient and resilient. The old farmer, his loyal bull, and his ancestral wagon were more than a man and his possessions. They were a unique entity, a living legend of Serene Valley, a love story between a man, his inheritance, and the creature that helped him honor her every day of his life. At the end of each day, when the sun was put and painted the sky with shades of orange and purple, Arthur drove the wagon back to his shelter. With infinite care, he cleaned the powder and mud of the wheels, checked each joint, each leather belt. It was a ritual of gratitude. Then he released Thunder from the yoke, giving him an affectionate palm in his muzzle and a bucket of fresh water. "Rest, my friend," he murmured. "Tomorrow, the road waits for us." While the bull gathered to his stable, Arthur was for another moment, his hand panting over the hot wood of the wagon, feeling the pulse of a century of life under his fingers. It was a silent prayer, a thanks for the past day, and a promise for the day it would come. The wagon was not just an object. It was his purpose, his connection with everything he had ever loved. The idyllic peace of Serene Valley, however, was about to be disturbed by a strange and dissonant force. One day, an expensive, noisy car of a strong color that fell sight crossed the village, raising a cloud of dust that settled over the flowers and the whitewashed houses. From him came 3 young men, dressed in clothes from the city that looked displaced in that bucolic scenario. They brought with them an air of arrogance and disdain, their high laughs and their shrill voices to break the harmony of the place. It was the children of a rich businessman who had bought land within the village boundaries, with the intention of building a luxury resort, a project that promised progress but that older villages saw distrust and fear. They did not see the serene beauty of the valley. They saw only one resource to be explored, a space to be conquered and monetized. These young people had no respect for the traditions or rhythm of life of the village. For them, this place was a primitive amusement park, and their inhabitants, figures of a past they considered outdated and irrelevant. They stared at Arthur and his wagon with poorly disguised contempt. One afternoon, while Arthur was slowly returning from the field, his way was blocked by the boys' showy car. They left, mocking the farmer's slowness. "Look at this," shouted one of them, pointing to the wagon. "A museum relic. Why don't you get a tractor, old man? Or rather, sell this junk and go to an elderly home." His words were like stones thrown at a stained glass, cruel and meaningless, and Arthur just looked at them with a deep sadness in their eyes, without giving them the satisfaction of an answer. Thunder, feeling the tension, snorted and hit a paw on the floor, a silent warning that the young people, in their ignorance, could not interpret. The conflict between the two worlds was inevitable. The boys spent their days to make noise, disturb the cattle, and leave a trash trail where they passed. They challenged the serene authority of the village elders with an insolence that shocked the community. His presence was an open wound in the landscape, a constant reminder that the outside world, with its greed and lack of soul, was knocking on the door. Arthur became the main target of his derision. His figure, with his simple dignity and his attachment to the past, represented everything they despised. The cart in particular seemed to irritate them deeply, as if their silent existence were an affront to their quick and disposable lifestyle. They saw it as a symbol of stagnation, an obstacle on the path of progress that your father wanted to force. The tension grew day after day. Young people have started to do small evils, such as hiding Arthur's tools or scaring their chickens. They were petty acts designed to undermine the spirit of the old farmer, to make him feel powerless and obsolete. But Arthur endured everything with a stoic patience. He has already seen droughts, storms, and diseases devastate his harvests. He had already faced the pain of the loss and hardness of life. The evil of some spoiled young people was, for him, just another weed in his field, something that needed to be supported with resilience and faith. However, in the back of his heart, he felt a dark feeling. He saw their eyes in their eyes, an empty, destructive anger that could not understand, and feared not for himself, but by his wagon, the silent guardian of his soul and family history. The greed that motivated the boys, inherited from their father, was blind to the beauty and value of what they wanted to destroy. The resort's plan implied the diversion of a stream that fed the lands of Arthur and other small farmers. It meant the demolition of old houses to give way to impersonal bungalows. It meant transforming the soul of Serene Valley into a product for fast consumption. Arthur's wagon, in his stubborn and worthy immobility, was a silent protest against all this. It was a living monument to a way of life that valued the community rather than profit, sustainability rather than exploration. And so she had to disappear. It was too powerful a symbol to be left alone, a thorn in the guilty conscience of those who sought to pave paradise and sell their pieces. One night, in the small tavern of the village, the young people drank more than they should. Their voices became higher, their bold bravats. "That old man and his stupid wagon are disturbing my father's business," said the group leader, his red alcohol face and anger. "Someone needs to teach him a lesson. Someone needs to show that his time has passed." His words floated in the air, loaded with smoke, and although some villagers had heard them with discomfort, no one intervened. There was a latent fear of the power and influence of the father of those boys, and so the seed of destruction was watered with cheap wine and resentment, ready to germinate in the darkness of the night, far from the eyes of consciousness and decency. The shadow of greed was not limited to the newcomers. She began to throw her tentacles over her own village. Some villagers, seduced by the promises of jobs and easy money that the resort project would bring, began to look at Arthur and their values with some impatience. They began to see their resistance not as an act of courage, but as an obstacle to their own enrichment. The conversations changed. The glances became evasive. The unity of the community, which was its greatest strength, began to show cracks. Greed was like a disease, to spread silently, to poison relationships, and corrode the ties that had been forged along generations. Arthur felt this change, and it hurt him more than the insults of the city's young people. He was increasingly isolated, a guardian of a treasure that few seemed to value. He continued his routine, his daily work with Thunder and the wagon. But now there was a melancholy in his countenance. It was as if he was fighting a lost battle, trying to hold the sand that was dripping him between his fingers. Its wagon was no longer only a symbol of family inheritance, but also a symbol of resistance against a tide of empty and predatory modernity. He knew he was protecting something much larger than a simple wooden object. He was protecting memory, dignity, and soul from a way of life that was being threatened with extinction. And I would do that to the end, even if I had to do it alone. The air in Serene Valley was heavy, loaded with omens. The birds seemed to sing with less joy. The wind seemed to whisper warnings between the leaves of the trees. The harmony had been broken. The arrival of young people and their ambitious plans had introduced an element of discord that the village had never known. The shadow of greed extended long and dark over the green fields, threatening to swallow the light of tradition and the community. Arthur was looking at the horizon, the hills where the sun was put, and prayed. He prayed by force, patience, and protection of his legacy. But deep down, a part of it knew that the storm was coming, and that his beloved Carvalho wagon was right in the center of his destructive path. The night fell on Serene Valley like a dark and heavy cloak, without stars to comfort the darkness. It was tonight that evil, fueled by alcohol and resentment, found his way to Arthur's barn. The three young people, driven by an irrational fury and a cruel desire to affirm their power, broke into the fragile door of the shelter where the wagon rested. There was no plan, just a destructive impulse, the need to annihilate the symbol they so despised. The sound of the wood crackling under the brute force of the pitfall echoed in the silence of the night, as the first thunder of a devastating storm. Arthur, in his light old sleep, heard the noise and his heart froze, knowingly knowing what was happening. He pulled his rope, his massive body tense like a spring about to burst. He had heard the shouts of vandal triumph, had smelled his sweat and evil. And he had seen his beloved wagon, his journey companion, to be brutally murdered. Her moguido was not the sound of an animal, it was a lament, a scream of pain that echoed the silent suffering of her master, a visceral expression of tragedy. At dawn, when the first rays of sunshine infiltrated the cracks of the destroyed barn, the news spread through the village like a fire. One by one, the neighbors came to see with their own eyes. The women covered their mouths with their hands, their eyes filled with tears. The men, with a hat in their hand, looked at the ground, a silent fury boiling inside them. Seeing Arthur's wagon in that state was like seeing the church of the desecrated village. It was an attack not only to a man, but to his collective identity, to his shared history. And in the midst of ruin, it was Arthur, sitting in a crate, immovable as a statue, the look lost in the void, unable to touch or even look straight at the remains of his inheritance. He was broken as his wagon. The culprits were nowhere. They had fled in the darkness, leaving behind their destruction as a cowardly signature. But everyone knew who they were. Their arrogance and threats had no doubt. The village felt a mixture of anger and shame. Anger for the brutality of the act, and shame for its own passivity, for having done nothing to prevent the shadow of greed from becoming a storm of violence. The sky, as if sharing the mourning of the village, began to darken. Great, heavy clouds gathered on serene and cold rain began to fall, as if the sky itself was crying for the loss, their tears mingling with the morning dew over the wreckage of the oak wagon. The rain washed the wooden pieces, making them dark and bright, as if they were bleeding. The smell of the moved wood and the wet earth filled the air, a funeral perfume. Arthur was still immovable, the rain steeping his clothes, his white hair glued to his forehead. It seemed to have aged decades in a single night. Its backbone, rather straight and proud, was now curved under the weight of a pain that was too large for a man to endure. He had lost his connection with the past, his reason for continuing to fight in the present, and his hope for the future. The world had become gray and silent. The melody of his life had been interrupted, replaced by a cacophony of pain and loss. The villages wanted to help, but they didn't know how. They offered words of comfort that sounded for hollows before the magnitude of the tragedy. They were offered to clean the mess, but Arthur shook his head in silence. An almost imperceptible gesture. He could not stand the idea of seeing the remains of his wagon being swept like rubbish. Each piece, however small and shattered, still contained a spark of memory, an echo of a lifetime. Let them go would be the final betrayal, and so he was a vigil, the guardian of a memory's cemetery. While the rain continued to fall, a tears curtain isolated him from the rest of the world. Lost in mourning no one could reach, thunder in his corner continued his restless vigil. He refused the food and water they offered him. His eyes never diverted from his master's immovable figure or the wreckage of the wagon. There was an intelligence in his pain, a depth of feeling that went beyond animal instinct. He shared Arthur's grief. His loyalty was not only to man, but to all that man represented: routine, work, partnership, the object that united them on his daily journey. The bull and the man were linked by an invisible thread of shared pain, both heartbroken, both lost in the wake of that terrible night when human evil had tried, and almost achieved, to destroy not only wood and iron, but also the spirit. 2 days passed. 2 days of incessant rain and a heavy silence that had settled on Arthur's property. The old farmer had barely moved. His pain was an anchor that held him to the place of destruction, and his soul seemed to have taken himself to a place where no one could reach it. The community, feeling powerless, observed the distance, the tight hearts of concern. It was then, on the morning of the 3rd day, that something extraordinary happened. The sky began to lighten, and a pale sunlight drilled the clouds, illuminating the devastation scene with an almost ethereal light. And it was in this light that thunder, that everyone in the village now called Ferdinando in honor of an old story of a kind bull, decided that the mourning had already lasted enough. With a powerful tug, he broke the rope that held him and walked out of the stable. There was a moment of tension. Some villagers retreated, fearing that the animal's pain had become blind fury. A bull of that size, agitated and free, was a dangerous force. But Ferdinando showed no sign of aggression. Instead, he walked slowly, with solemn dignity, to the hill of wreckage. He stopped and looked at the departed wood, his breath forming steam clouds in the cold morning air. Then he looked at Arthur, who was still sitting, oblivious to everything, a statue of despair. The bull stepped toward his master and kindly, with a delicacy that seemed impossible for such a powerful creature, leaned his huge muzzle on Arthur's shoulder. It was a soft touch, a silent question, a gesture of comfort that transcended the barriers between the species. Arthur shuddered with the touch, as if awakening from a long nightmare. He slowly lifted his head and looked into his mate's big, dark eyes. In them, he did not see only the reflection of his own pain, but something more, a spark of determination, a silent promise. Ferdinando then walked away and turned his attention to the wreckage. With incredible accuracy, using his horns and muzzle, he began to separate the larger pieces of wood from the rubble. He pushed the broken tablets, the pieces of the wheels, the remains of the shaft, with meticulous care. It was not a random act of an animal rummaging in the trash. There was a purpose in what he did, an intelligence that left all who watched completely gaping and tear-stamped. The villagers, who had approached with caution, stopped where they were, observing the scene in silence and with a reverent astonishment. The children stopped crying. The adults arrested their breath. They were witnessing something they would tell their grandchildren. Ferdinando, the bull, the silent guardian, was trying to put the world in order again. He joined the wagon pieces on an organized lot near the entrance to the Arthur workshop. Each time it moved a larger piece, he looked at his master, as if to say, "You see? Not everything is lost. We can fix it. We can rebuild." It was a message of hope in its purest and most unexpected form, coming from an animal heart that refused to let his human companion surrender to darkness. The scene was so moving that even the hardest men of the village felt a knot in the throat. Women cried openly, not of sadness, but of an overwhelming emotion in the face of such a demonstration of loyalty and love. A bull was teaching them a lesson on resilience, not giving up on adversity. He was showing them that true strength does not reside in the ability to destroy, but in the desire to rebuild. Ferdinando's act was a balm for the open wound of the community. It was a moment of pure magic, a miracle that unfolded in front of his eyes, proving that the bonds of affection are the most powerful force of the universe, able to inspire action and heal the deepest wounds. Arthur watched, and for the first time in 3 days, a different emotion of pain began to stir in his chest. He saw his friend's determination, his refusal to accept defeat. He saw unconditional love in that magnificent creature, a love that asked for nothing in return. Slowly, very slowly, the old farmer got up. His legs were rigid, his body sick, but there was a new light in his eyes. He walked to Ferdinando, who stopped his work and looked at him waiting. Arthur put his trembling hand in the head of the bull, among the powerful horns who now served a purpose of creation, not destruction. And for the first time, Arthur cried. Tears ran freely through his wrinkled face, tears of gratitude, relief, and love so deep that he could not be expressed in words. "Thanks, my friend," whispered Arthur, his voice hoarse for the lack of use. "Thanks." Ferdinando just blinked his big eyes and let out a low murmur, as if he was okay. The bond between them, already strong, had been seasoned in the fire of the tragedy and had emerged unbreakable, forged in a more precious metal than gold. the silent guardian had achieved what no word of comfort had achieved. He had broken the spell of despair that held his master. He had returned his will to live, not to deny his pain, but by showing him a way through it. The path of reconstruction, the path of hope. That moment changed everything. Ferdinando's action was the catalyst who transformed the village's passive mourning into collective action. Inspired by the bull's example, the villagers felt a wave of determination. If an animal could show so much courage and hope, how could they, human beings, be stopped to regret? Silent cry has become a murmur of voices, and the murmurs into words of action. The blacksmith, the carpenter, the young and the old people, everyone looked at the bunch of wreckage that Ferdinando had begun to organize, and then to Arthur, who now lifted, fragile but determined, next to his faithful companion. The apathy had been broken. Hope had reborn. The image of Ferdinando, the great Taurus, gently pushing the remains of his family's cart, trying to rebuild the world of his beloved master, would be forever recorded in the memory of Valle Sereno. It was not an act of revenge or anger. It was an act of pure love, a demonstration of empathy that challenged logic. That day, everyone learned that heroes are not just in human form. Sometimes they come with 4 legs, a huge heart, and a loyalty that knows no boundaries. Ferdinand, the silent guardian, not only saved a wagon, he saved a man. And in doing so, saved the hearts of his community, leaving everyone in tears, not of sadness, but of a deep and transformative admiration. The wave of emotion that swept the village with the act of quickly turned into an action tide. What the bull began, the community was determined to end. The first to go a step forward was the old Mateos, the village carpenter, a man whose hands were as skilled as Arthur's. He approached Arthur, who was still next to Ferdinand, and said in a firm voice, "Arthur, my friend, the main structure seems to have endured. The wheels and panels are destroyed, but the heart still hits. With your permission, I would like to help bring it back to life." His gaze was not pity, but of respect and solidarity. It was an invitation, not a charity. And Arthur, looking at the bunch of wood that his bull had gathered, slowly nodded, a brightness of purpose to rekindle himself in his tired eyes. That was the spark that everyone needed. As if they had been called by an invisible horn, the villagers began to mobilize. The blacksmith, John, a large man with an even larger heart, arrived with his toolbox, announcing that he would forge new iron rims to the wheels, stronger than the originals. "Those vandals have destroyed the old iron, but they cannot destroy our fire," he declared, his voice to the Ribambar. Younger farmers, who once looked at Arthur with a mixture of respect and impatience, now approached with shame and determination, offering their strength to move the heavy pieces and clean the wreckage. The women in the village organized themselves to bring food and drink to the workers, transforming the place of tragedy into a shipyard of hope. Arthur's workshop, which had been silent and dusty, was filled with life. The sound of hammers, mountains, and animated conversations replaced the silence of mourning. The reconstruction of the wagon became a community project, a symbolic act of challenge against the violence and greed they had attacked them. Each person brought what they could. Some brought wooden boards stored in their own barns, tree wood that their grandparents had planted. Others brought nails, screws, and varnish pots. Children, too small to help with heavy work, were making messages, feeling part of something important. The wagon was no longer just Arthur's inheritance. It was now the inheritance of all, a symbol of their resilience and unity. Arthur, invigorated by the wave of support, became the conductor of that reconstruction orchestra. Its pain has become focused energy. He shared his knowledge, guiding his less experienced hands, explaining the secrets of the carpentry his father had taught him. As they worked, he told stories of the original wagon. "This board," he said, pointing to a recovered piece, "that's where my Isabel poured a blackberry basket when he was young. It was stained forever." And in telling these stories, he was not just reconstructing an object. He was weaving the old memories in the new fabric of the wagon, ensuring that its soul would not be lost. The villagers heard in silence, understanding that they were helping to rebuild not only wood and iron, but a dream. Ferdinando watched everything closely. He was not tied, but did not move away. He lay in the shadow of a tree, his presence a calm and constant force. He seemed to watch over progress, his wise gaze to move from one face to the other, as if he was approving the work. Sometimes Arthur went to him and shared a piece of bread, whispering words of thanks. The bull, the catalyst of all, was the silent guardian not only of his master, but of the whole project. His unshakable loyalty had inspired the community, and now his quiet presence gave them strength to continue. He was the pulsating heart of that endeavor, a constant reminder of why they are doing that. The days turned into weeks. Under Matthew's skilled hands and Arthur's guidance, a new wagon began to take shape. The wheels were the first to be completed wood and ironworks, more robust and beautiful than the old ones. The side panels were redone, and the son of Matthew, a young man with a talent for the drawing, asked permission to carve new images in the wood. Instead of the old floral patterns, he carried out a scene. A great bull protecting a wagon surrounded by a united community. Arthur, seeing the drawing, felt his eyes fill with tears once more. It was the perfect tribute, the story of his recorded resurrection, so that future generations never forget. The reconstruction of the wagon has healed more than just the departed wood. He healed the cracks that greed had begun to open in the community. Those who had been tempted by the resort's promises now saw the true value of their union. They worked side by side with those who always opposed the project, and in shared sweat and in the common goal, they rediscovered their sense of belonging. The Arthur Workshop became the new center of the village, a place where the differences were set aside for a greater good. The sound of hammers was the sound of a community to heal, reaffirm their values, and forge a future based on solidarity, not selfishness. Finally, the day came when the last screw was tightened and the last layer of varnish was applied. The new wagon shone under the sun, unlike the old one, but somehow the same. He carried the marks of many hands, the strength of many hearts. It was more than a wagon. It was a monument to friendship, loyalty, and the indomitable spirit of Serene Valley. The entire village met to admire the completed work. There was a feeling of pride and the air that was palpable. They had not just rebuilt an object. They had rebuilt their hope and reaffirmed their identity. They had transformed an act of destruction into an act of creation. Arthur walked around the wagon, his hands sliding over the smooth and hot wood. He touched the new notches, felt the solid weight of the new wheels. Then he turned to the crowd, to his friends and neighbors, his face a mirror of deep emotions. "I have no words to thank," he said, his embarged voice. "You didn't just give me a wagon just, the faith have returned. Today, this is no longer my wagon, it's our wagon." And at that moment, with the sun shining on them and boasting to observe with their kind eyes, everyone understood that they had participated in something that transcended manual work. They had participated in the reconstruction of a dream, making him stronger and more beautiful than ever. The day of the first trip with the rebuilt wagon was a party day in Valle Sereno. The sky was clear blue, and the air had the sweet smell of wildflowers. The entire village gathered in the square, his best clothes dressed, his faces illuminated by smiles. The wagon was in the center of everything, not empty, but loaded with the fruits of collective work. Bread baskets, cheeses, fruits, and flowers, an abundance offer to celebrate its resurrection. Arthur, standing next to his reborn masterpiece, looked like a new man. The wrinkles of pain had been softened, replaced by lines of gratitude and joy. He wore his Sunday shirt, the same one he had worn at his wedding, and in his eyes shone the same hope as yes. Beside his side, imposing and serene, was Scrooge, adorned with a wreath of flowers that the children had made for him. With a cheerful solemnity, Arthur bounded to Ferdinando to the new wagon. The yoke, also repaired and reinforced, settled comfortably on the bull's wide shoulders. The animal seemed to understand the importance of the moment. He raised his head proudly, his dark hair shining in the sun. When Arthur took the reins, an expectant silence fell on the crowd. With a soft click of the tongue and the word, "Come, friend," the wagon began to move. The sound of the new wheels on the dirt was not a ranger, but a soft, firm melody. It was the sound of the restart, the sound of the community's victory over hatred. A spontaneous applause erupted from the crowd, a sound of pure joy and relief that echoed through the hills. The makeshift procession traveled the streets of the village. Arthur and Ferdinando led the way, followed by the entire population. They did not go to the market or the countryside. They were simply reaffirming their presence, to celebrate their existence. They passed in front of the houses of all who helped, and with each stop, more flowers and smiles were added to the celebration. The children ran beside, trying to touch the new wood and the soft muffin of Ferdinando. It was a baptism, a consecration. The wagon, born of destruction, was being blessed by the love and joy of its people. It was a walking testimony of the power of the union, the proof that together they were unbreakable. As for young people who had caused destruction, they were never seen in Serene Valley again. The news of what his wickedness had inspired, the union and resilience of the village, reached his father's ears. Ashamed by the reaction of the community and the negative attention that the incident attracted, he silently abandoned his plans to the resort. The shadow of greed that had threatened the village retreated, defeated not by strength or law, but by the simple and powerful demonstration of human solidarity, inspired by the loyalty of an animal. The village had faced its biggest challenge and had left it stronger, more united, and more certain of its values. The victory was not noisy, but deep and lasting. Later that same day, when the party slowed and people began to return to their homes, Arthur led the wagon to their usual resting place, under the great Ipe. The sun was beginning to put on, painting the sky with the same colors as usual, but now Arthur saw them with a new appreciation. He defiled Ferdinando and sat on the edge of the wagon as he used to do. The bull, instead of grazing, was beside him, his head resting on the old farmer's knee. They sat silently there for a long time, watching the night coming, the man and the animal linked by a bond that the words could not describe. Arthur reflected on the events of recent weeks. He realized that the Vandals, in his attempt to destroy him, had given him the greatest gift of all. They destroyed an object made of wood and iron, but in doing so, they revealed the strength of something much longer lasting, the bonds of love and friendship. They had tried to erase their past, but instead they gave him a new future, a future intertwined with the gratitude and affection of his entire community. He looked at the new carvings in the wagon, the image of Ferdinando, his protector, and understood that his inheritance was not just in Madeira, but in the stories of courage and loyalty she now told. His hand caressed his massive head of Ferdinando, his fingers to go through the rough. "You saved me, my friend," murmured Arthur, his voice full of deep emotion. "You saved us, everyone." The bull just let out a pleasant sigh, closing his eyes under the touch of his master. They didn't need words. His understanding was complete, forged in shared work, tested by the tragedy and sealed by unconditional loyalty. They were two souls, a human and an animal, who had found themselves and had become one on their journey through life. The pain of loss had been transformed into a celebration of love in its purest form. The bond between Arthur and Ferdinando became a legend in Serene Valley, a story told to inspire future generations. A story about how the greatest strength can be found in greater kindness, and how love can rebuild what hatred destroys. The new wagon, the community wagon, continued to serve the village for many, many years, a constant reminder that the true treasure is not in the things we have, but in the ties we form. And whenever Arthur and Ferdinando passed, people smiled, their hearts heated by the vision of that unbreakable loop, a living testimony of the fact that the deepest connections are not made of rope or leather, but of a loyalty that not even the cruel of actions can break. By falling night, under the cloak of stars that now seemed to shine more intensely on Serene Valley, Arthur continued next to his bull and his wagon. A deep peace filled your heart. He had faced darkness and had found the light, not alone, but loaded on the shoulders of a community and in the heart of a loyal friend. Carvalho Wagon was no longer just a legacy of the past, but a promise to the future. A promise that as long as there was goodness, friendship, and the loyalty of a silent guardian, the soul of Serene Valley would never be destroyed. The unqualified bond between man and the bull was living proof of it. In a small village forgotten by time, the most valuable inheritance of an old farmer was brutally reduced to splinters, leaving his spirit in ruins. Its wagon, a family treasure with a century of memories, a destroyed lay, the victim of pure evil. But what followed was not a tale of revenge or human justice. It was the silent promise of an animal that triggered a miracle. What could a simple bull do to such a deep pain and such a devastating loss? His answer, such a deep and unexpected loyalty, not only moved an entire community to tears, but also rekindled the flame of hope. Get ready to find out how the silent strength of an unlikely guardian has proved that the real ties cannot be broken by hatred, but rebuilt by love.